I've always been the kind of person who finds peace in the stillness that only comes when most of the world is fast asleep. Now living in the city, it's rare to find that kind of quiet during the day, so I had made a habit of taking the last train home. It was the time when the hustle and bustle faded into the background, and I could just think. That night wasn't any different. It was late, and I was coming back from a long day of work. The train station was nearly empty, just a few stragglers here and there. People scattered across the platform, staring blankly at their phones or lost in their own worlds. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everything a washed-out, ghostly glow. I remember feeling the chill of the underground air and tugging my jacket tighter around me as I boarded the train. It was one of those old cars where the seats face each other, and as I found a spot by the window, I noticed a man sitting a few rows behind me. He didn't stand out at the time, just another tired face in the city, probably on his way home like I was. The train jolted to life, the rhythmic clacking of the wheels on the track settling into a hypnotic pattern. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, letting my eyes drift shut. It wasn't unusual for me to doze off on the ride home. After all, I had taken this route hundreds of times before. The ride was long enough for a short nap, but never so long that I risked missing my stop. I let the sound of the train lull me to sleep, grateful for a few moments of rest. But when I woke up, something was different. The train was still moving, but the car had emptied out almost entirely. A few people remained scattered through the seats, but it felt quieter. Too quiet. The usual hum of late-night conversations or the occasional sound of a phone ringing was absent. I shifted in my seat, rubbing my eyes, and that's when I saw him. The man from earlier. He wasn't sitting in the same spot anymore. He had moved. Now he was directly across from me, just a few feet away, sitting in the seat facing mine. His posture was stiff, his body angled slightly toward me, and his eyes were locked onto mine, unblinking, cold. I immediately felt a chill run down my spine, the kind you get when you realize something's not quite right but your brain hasn't fully processed the danger yet. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, it was late, and people on these trains often zoned out, their eyes unfocused, lost in their thoughts. But this was different. His gaze wasn't vacant. It was fixed, intense, like he was studying me. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat and glanced out the window, hoping to break the connection. The city lights blurred past, streaks of neon and shadow blending together. I tried to lose myself in the familiar sight, but I could feel his eyes still on me, like a weight pressing down on my skin. So when I looked back, he hadn't moved an inch. There was something unsettling about the way he sat there, so still, so silent. His clothes were plain, nothing remarkable. A dark jacket, jeans, sneakers, but it was his face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed too large for his skull, that kept drawing me back. He wasn't blinking, not once. I thought maybe he was sick, maybe something was wrong with him. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen him somewhere before, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't place him. The train rocked gently as we pulled into the next station. I watched as a few more passengers got off the car, growing even emptier. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird guy on the train, probably tired like the rest of us. But when the train started moving again, he still didn't break his gaze. I decided I needed to get out of there. My stop was still a few stations away, but I could transfer to another line if I got off early. It wasn't a big deal. I'd done it before. As the train approached the next station, I stood up, trying to appear calm. I didn't want to let him know he was bothering me. Maybe if I got off, he'd stay on the train and I could forget about the whole thing. But as I reached for my bag and started toward the door, something strange happened. He stood up too. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned and saw him rise slowly from his seat. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't hesitating either. He just stood up and started walking toward the door, mirroring my movements perfectly. I glanced around the train car. There were still a few other people, but none of them seemed to notice what was happening. They were too wrapped up in their own worlds, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones, oblivious to the growing tension in the air. I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just getting off at the same stop as me. The train came to a halt, and the doors hissed open. I stepped off quickly, my footsteps echoing in the nearly deserted station. For a moment, I dared to hope that he wasn't following me, that he'd stay on the train and disappear into the night. But when I glanced over my shoulder, my stomach dropped. He was there, a few paces behind me, walking slowly, deliberately, in the same direction. Panic started to rise in my chest. I quickened my pace, my footsteps growing louder against the concrete floor. I could hear his footsteps too, still keeping time with mine. I didn't know what to do. The station was almost empty, and the only exit was a long flight of stairs leading up to the street. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to think. Should I run? Should I confront him? Then he spoke. "You look just like her." His words stopped me in my tracks. They were low, almost a whisper, but they cut through the silence like a knife. I turned around slowly, my breath catching in my throat, and he was closer now, just a few steps behind me. His eyes still locked onto mine. "You remind me of her," he said again, louder this time. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in days. I didn't know what to say. Who was he talking about? What did he mean? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but nothing added up. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. I couldn't stay in that station with him any longer. I turned and started up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps quickening, closing the distance between us. I didn't dare look back. My only focus was getting to the street, to where there would be people, light, safety. "You can't leave me again," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the station. I ran faster, my legs burning as I reached the top of the stairs and burst onto the sidewalk. The street was dimly lit, but there were a few cars passing by, a few people walking in the distance. I ran toward them, desperate for the comfort of the crowd. When I finally reached the corner, I risked a glance behind me. He was gone. I stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, my heart still racing. The street was empty now, just the faint hum of the city in the background. I looked around, expecting to see him emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing. He had vanished. I didn't wait around to find out where he went. I hurried home, locking the door behind me, checking every window, every lock. I sat in my apartment, the silence pressing in on me. My mind replayed his words over and over. "You look just like her." Who was he talking about? Why had he been following me? I didn't have answers, and the uncertainty gnawed at me for days. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting for me to leave the safety of my home. Every time I stepped outside, I scanned the streets, looking for that pale face, those unblinking eyes. But he never showed up again. The train ride became unbearable after that. Every time I boarded, I found myself scanning the faces of the other passengers, searching for him. I changed my route to different trains at different times, but I never felt safe, not really. And even now, months later, I can't get his face out of my mind. That cold, hollow stare. The way he followed me without hesitation, like he had been waiting for me, like he knew me. But I didn't know him. At least, I don't think I did.